The stars had always been full of promise for generations. Humans looked up and believed that the universe was waiting for them. When the first colonies were built beyond Earth, people said it was the start of a golden age. Families left their home planet to create new lives on faraway worlds. Children grew under alien skies, and cities rose where once there had only been dust for a time. It seemed like nothing could stop humanity's march among the stars. But one day, the promise of the stars turned into silence. One of the colonies, a place known for its shining towers and endless green farms, suddenly went dark. There were no warnings, no distress signals, no last messages. The lights went out and every voice vanished. Earth received only silence. At first, people thought it was a system failure, a broken transmitter, or maybe a storm in space. But days turned into weeks, and still, nothing came from the colony. It was as if the world itself had been erased. Earth tried to hide the news. The High Council said there was nothing to fear. The communication delays were normal, but whispers spread quickly. Merchants who traveled between the stars told stories of strange shadows near the lost colony. Miners spoke of ghost signals and empty ships drifting without crews. Fear began to rise in the hearts of men and women. And fear is a thing that travels faster than any ship. The colony had not been the first to be lost. Long before smaller outposts had gone silent too. People thought it was accidents or poor planning. Now it seemed clear that something was hunting the children of Earth. Something out there wanted the colonies gone. In hidden chambers, Earth's leaders argued. Some believed it was an alien force, ancient and powerful. Others said it was a natural event like a storm across the galaxy. But one thing was certain. Entire human worlds were being wiped away. And if it continued, Earth itself would not remain safe. A decision was made. Ships would be sent to investigate. Not just scouts, but war fleets. Humanity would no longer watch from the safety of Earth. They would go into the dark to face whatever had taken their people. The first fleet launched in silence. There were no speeches, no celebrations, only soldiers, engineers, and captains who knew they might never return. They carried the weight of the lost colony with them. They carried the fear of billions left behind. And they carried one question that no one dared to speak. Who had erased a human world? When the fleet reached the empty colony, they found nothing but ruins. The shining towers were shattered. The green farms turned to ash. No bodies remained, no weapons, no sign of battle. It was as if every living soul had been plucked from existence. The soldiers searched house by house, street by street, but found only dust, a city built by hope. Now nothing more than a graveyard without graves. Then they saw something. On the walls of the central dome, strange marks had been carved. They were not human letters, not symbols of any known culture. The lines seemed alive, shifting when looked at too long. The message was clear even without words, and this was a warning. The colony had not fallen by chance, it had been taken. The fleet commander sent a final report back to Earth. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried fear. "We are not alone in the dark. Someone does not want us here," she said. Then the message ended, and once more silence filled the channel. Back on Earth, billions waited for answers. Rumors grew like wildfire. Some said the aliens were already among them. Some believed Earth itself had ordered the erasure. Trust began to crack and fear became anger. People demanded to know the truth. But the council remained silent, and above them all, the stars continued to shine, cold and distant. They gave no answers, only questions. What power could wipe out entire worlds, leaving no trace of life? Why had they targeted human colonies, and most of all, how long before Earth itself would be erased? The story of humanity's survival among the stars had changed. It was no longer a tale of bright hope and endless growth. It had become a mystery, a shadow creeping in the void. The colonies were silent, the fleets were afraid, and the people of Earth felt the weight of something unseen pressing closer every day. Somewhere in the dark, a new chapter of history was beginning. The enemy was watching, waiting, learning, and humanity would have to decide, would they fight? Or would they vanish like the colonies? The silence of the stars was only the beginning. The news of the vanished colony could not be contained. Earth's council tried to silence the rumors, but space traders, pilots, and miners carried stories faster than any government report. Every station, every port, every ship in the void began to whisper the same thing. The colonies were not safe. At first, people laughed nervously. Some said it was only broken technology. Others claimed pirates had taken the world. But the whispers grew darker with each passing day. Too many outposts had gone silent. Too many ships had failed to return. Even the bravest captains, men and women who had crossed the stars for decades, spoke with lowered voices. They said something was moving in the dark. Merchants told of drifting vessels, their lights still burning but their decks empty. Miners swore they had heard voices in the static of their radios, voices that were not human. Explorers claimed they had seen shapes larger than cities sliding past the edges of their scanners. Silent as ghosts, no one could prove these tales. Yet no one could dismiss them either, because every week another colony went silent. Fear spread across the stars like an invisible plague. On the colonies that still lived, families packed emergency ships. Mothers held children close and begged to return to Earth. Farmers stopped planting. Builders stopped building. Why create a future if tomorrow the world could be gone? The dream of the stars began to rot. On Earth, the High Council grew desperate. Public faith was breaking, and without faith, order would collapse. So they gave speeches filled with calm words. They promised stronger fleets, they promised protection. But their voices did not reach the hearts of the people. The whispers of fear were louder. In dark taverns on orbital stations, strangers exchanged secret theories. One said the aliens were hunters testing human strength. Another claimed the colonies had not been destroyed at all, but stolen into another dimension. A third insisted it was Earth itself, that the Council erased colonies to control population. No two stories were the same, but all carried the same seed: mistrust. The fear touched even the soldiers. Men and women who once stood proud in uniform now lay awake in their bunks, wondering if they too would vanish. They had seen the ruins. They had walked the empty streets. They had watched towers crumble without fire or impact, and they too had no answers. The fleet commanders wrote endless reports. They mapped every missing outpost, every ghost ship, every broken signal. The pattern was unclear, but one detail haunted them. The enemy erased only the colonies that thrived. The weak, the failing, the half-empty stations were left alone. It was as if someone wanted to erase human pride, not human survival in the great halls of Earth. The Council gathered once more. The leaders sat beneath banners of history, flags that told of wars and victories. But none of those wars had been fought against an enemy that left no face, no name. Some demanded open war, to burn the stars with human fire. Others demanded retreat, to gather all survivors back to Earth and abandon the dream. The chamber echoed with shouting, but no answer came, because no one knew who the enemy truly was. Meanwhile, the whispers continued to grow. On the far side of the galaxy, colonists refused to sleep at night. They said they could feel eyes upon them when they looked at the sky. On mining ships, workers tied charms to their suits, as if luck could protect them from erasure. On Earth itself, riots broke out in cities. Citizens demanded truth, demanded proof, demanded weapons to defend themselves. But no weapon had yet been tested against the unseen. What use is a sword against a shadow? What use is a fleet against an enemy that erases instead of kills? A small group of scientists began their own secret work. They studied the strange symbols carved on the lost colony's dome, the marks that seemed alive, twisting when viewed too long. They whispered among themselves that the symbols were not only a warning, but a signature, a message from the erasers. But what it meant none could yet say. Then came the ghost broadcast. A weak signal captured by a traitor near the edge of colonized space. It was a human voice, broken and full of terror. "They are here. They are inside the light," the voice cried before cutting into static. The traitor swore it came from a colony that had already been erased. If true, then some victims had not been killed instantly. They had watched the erasure happen and had time to scream. The whispers of fear became roars of panic. Ships fled toward Earth in great waves. Colonies closed their ports and refused to answer hails. Neighbors stopped trusting neighbors. Every flicker of light in the sky was seen as a threat. Every silence in the radio was heard as death. And still above the noise of fear, one question rose higher than all. If the colonies could be erased so easily, how long before Earth itself would be next? The whispers had become the voice of the stars, and in that voice was only fear. Behind closed doors, Earth's leaders gathered. The great council chamber was sealed, guarded by soldiers who did not speak. No cameras, no reporters, no voices from the outside were allowed in. Only the highest commanders, the most trusted scientists, and the oldest politicians sat in the circle. And all of them carried the same heavy question: how do you fight an enemy you cannot see? The council had received new reports from the fleets. Colonies continued to vanish, not one survivor ever found. Ships sent to investigate returned with the same story. No bodies. No fire, no weapons, only silence. But hidden in the data were patterns too strange to ignore. The erasures were not random. They followed lines like a hunter marking territory. And those lines were moving slowly closer to Earth. The council leader, an old woman named Chancellor Varen, rose to speak. Her voice was steady, though her eyes were tired. "Fear spreads faster than truth," she said. "And truth is all we have left." She revealed evidence collected in secret. Data that had never reached the public. Not only were the colonies erased, but the memory of them was fading. Records deleted themselves. Star maps rewrote their coordinates. Even children born on those worlds could no longer remember the names of their homes. It was not just destruction, it was erasure of history itself. The chamber fell silent. For a moment, even the most hardened generals felt cold. If humanity could be made to forget its own children, then the war was not only against life, but against memory. Chancellor Varen continued. "We cannot announce this to the people," she said. "They would lose all hope, and chaos would finish what the enemy began." Instead, she gave secret orders. A project hidden from public eyes. A weapon born not of fire but of thought. In the underground vaults of Earth, scientists had been working on something forbidden, a system that could record human memory beyond the mind, every thought, every image, every detail stored in machines that the enemy could not touch. If the erasers could wipe history, then humanity would anchor its history in steel and code. This was to be Earth's first secret weapon. But there was more. The fleets were to be divided. Some would act openly, patrolling the colonies, showing the people that Earth was strong. But others would move in silence, hidden fleets that would follow the erasure lines. Their orders were not to fight, but to watch, to listen, to find what the enemy truly was, because a war without knowledge was only suicide. The commanders resisted. Many demanded open battle. "Our fleets are strong, our weapons can burn worlds," they cried. But the scientists shook their heads. "What good is fire against shadows?" one asked. "What good is a cannon when the target cannot be remembered?" So the council's orders stood. Silence and secrecy. The enemy would not even know what humanity was preparing. Meanwhile, messages were sent in coded whispers to trusted captains. These were men and women known for loyalty, not to the council but to humanity itself. They were told of hidden missions, strange cargo, and secret stations built far from any colony. Their task was not glory, but survival. And survival was now the highest form of victory. In the shadows of the solar system, construction began. Gigantic memory vaults buried beneath the ice of moons. Encrypted star maps carved into asteroids. Signals sent into deep space carrying records of every human colony. Every name, every face. If Earth fell, if the colonies were erased, the truth would still remain hidden in places the enemy could not reach. Yet the enemy moved faster than the council hoped. Within weeks, another 3 colonies were lost. The secret fleets reported seeing shapes in the void, long and thin, stretching like blades. They never attacked directly, they only drifted, watching. And when the humans tried to fire, their weapons passed through empty space. The shapes dissolved like smoke, then returned hours later, closer, always closer. One captain, braver than most, sent a private message before his ship went dark. "They are studying us," he whispered. "They erase not for power, but for knowledge. We are their experiment." Then his signal broke, and his ship was never seen again. The council's fear grew, but fear was not the only fire in the chamber, for beneath the silence, anger burned. Humanity had faced extinction before on Earth itself, through wars, plagues, and disasters. And each time they had risen stronger. Now, with entire colonies erased, that same defiance began to rise again. The secret orders spread quietly. Soldiers drilled harder. Captains sharpened their strategies. Scientists worked without rest in their hidden labs. Even the ordinary people, though they did not know the full truth, felt the change. Something was moving beneath the surface of fear. A slow and growing resolve. The council's final words to the hidden fleets were simple. "Do not let the enemy write our ending." For if history itself could be erased, then survival was not just life, it was memory, it was truth. It was the story of humanity refusing to vanish. And so Earth moved into the shadows of war, not openly, not with fire and banners, but with silence, secrets, and the stubborn hope of a species that refused to forget. The secret orders had been given. The stage for the true war had been set. The whispers of fear became reality when the hunters finally showed themselves. For months, humans had seen only ruins and silence. But now, in the black oceans of space, the enemy appeared not as ghosts, not as fading shapes, but as ships vast and silent. It began at the edge of a thriving colony called Arena. The world was bright with green fields and wide rivers, a jewel among the stars. Families lived in tall crystal towers. Children played under skies of two suns. They believed their defenses were strong, but no defense mattered when the hunters arrived. The first watchers on the colony's scanners saw them. Long shadows moving against the light of the suns. Not metal, not rock, something different. Something alive yet not alive. The shapes were sharp like blades. Stretching for miles, they did not send messages. They did not announce demands. They only drifted closer, silent and patient. The colony's leaders called for help. Emergency signals raced to Earth. The defense fleet stationed nearby rushed forward. Dozens of human warships, engines burning bright. They formed a wall between the colony and the hunters. But the hunters did not stop. The first shot was fired by a human captain. A bright lance of plasma cut across the void. The beam struck the shadow of a hunter. For a moment it seemed to connect. Then the shape dissolved into smoke and reappeared on the other side. Untouched, the humans fired again and again, but their weapons only tore holes in empty space. The hunters were there yet not there, solid and unreal at once. Then the hunters moved, not fast, not in rage, but in perfect silence. They slid past the human fleet, ignoring the weapons, ignoring the fire. Their long bodies stretched across the sky above the colony, and the world below trembled. Citizens ran through the streets. Mothers held children close. Soldiers prepared their weapons, though none knew what to fight. And then, without a sound, the towers of Arena began to fade. Not collapse, not burn, but fade. Stone turned to dust, rivers to emptiness. People screamed as their voices broke into static. Entire families vanished like mist under the morning sun. From orbit, the human fleet watched in horror. Every defense system fired, every weapon launched, but nothing touched the hunters. The colony continued to vanish, erased layer by layer, until only a gray scar remained where life had been. One captain refused to retreat. His name was Dalen. Known for his courage in earlier wars, he drove his ship directly toward the hunters. He shouted through the comms, "If they cannot be killed, then let them know humans will not bow." His ship slammed into the shadow. For an instant, the hunter flickered as if surprised, but then both the ship and the captain were gone. Erased as if they had never existed. The fleet had no choice but to withdraw. They carried the survivors they could save. A handful who escaped before the erasure began. But the colony of Arena was gone, its name, its history, even its place on the star maps already beginning to fade. Back on Earth, the Council received the grim report. For the first time, they had seen the enemy not as rumor, not as whispers, but as hunters. And the truth was worse than any fear. The hunters did not want land, or wealth, or slaves. They wanted erasure, they wanted silence. The scientists studied the few fragments left behind. Sensors recorded strange signals, patterns that bent light and twisted memory. The hunters seemed to exist both inside space and outside it, as if they were part of the void itself, and that made them almost impossible to strike. Among the soldiers, anger began to grow. They had seen their friends vanish, their homes erased. They swore vengeance, even if it meant death. But the commanders knew vengeance alone was useless. To fight the hunters, humanity needed more than fire. They needed understanding. They needed a way to drag the shadows into the light. In secret, the hidden fleets followed the hunters. From system to system, they tracked the shadows. They saw how the hunters never rushed, never wasted movement. Each colony was taken slowly, carefully. It was not war as humans knew it, it was something colder. Like a farmer harvesting crops, and the crops were human worlds. The whispers of fear changed into a new truth. The hunters were not ghosts. They were real. They had faces of shadow, bodies like blades, and they had chosen humanity as their prey on Earth. Chancellor Varen spoke once more to the council. "We now know what hunts us," she said. "But we still do not know why, and until we know why, we cannot hope to win." Her words hung heavy because the hunters had arrived, and humanity's dream of the stars was becoming a nightmare. The hunters no longer hid in shadows. They had shown themselves at Arena, and now they moved with purpose. Every colony, every station, every fleet knew the truth. Humanity was at war. The first great battle came near a world called Vera. It was one of Earth's strongest colonies. A fortress built in orbit and on the ground. Massive cannons lined its skies. Fleets of warships circled its surface. If any place could resist the hunters, it was Vera. The people believed they were safe. But safety was a lie. The hunters arrived in silence, as they always did. Long shadows stretching across the stars. Their shapes glided without sound, without flame. The scanners counted 7 of them. 7 hunters against hundreds of human ships. The commanders believed they had a chance. They were wrong. The battle began with fire. Human fleets opened with every weapon they had. Beams lit the void. Missiles streaked like comets. Cannons thundered. The hunters seemed to blur, dissolving, reforming. Some attacks passed through them like smoke. Others struck but left no wound. Still, the humans pressed on. Because surrender was not in their nature, the hunters finally struck back. Not with weapons, not with fire, but with silence. A single shadow moved through the fleet. Where it passed, ships dimmed, their lights fading. Crews screamed over the comms as their controls vanished in their hands. Entire ships dissolved into nothing. No explosion, no wreckage, just emptiness where life had been. The humans answered with fury. A squadron of destroyers rammed the nearest hunter. The clash shook the void. For a moment the shadow flickered. Its form breaking apart, cheers rose across the comms. But the joy lasted only seconds. The destroyers were gone, erased with the hunter. And when the smoke cleared, the shadow returned, whole again. The colony of Vera prepared for the worst. Its great cannons fired, shaking the planet. But the hunters drifted past the weapons. Ignoring them, they reached the surface, and the erasure began from orbit. Soldiers watched cities vanish. Towers faded, rivers dried. People screamed as their voices turned to static. Entire armies on the ground lifted their rifles against the sky, firing hopelessly. They vanished in lines. Battalions erased as if painted out by an unseen hand. The fleet commanders tried everything. They ordered kamikaze runs. They unleashed forbidden weapons. The void burned with human courage, but courage could not stop erasure. In the chaos, one ship became legend. The battleship Solace, commanded by Captain Aaron Cade. When the fleet broke apart, Cade refused to retreat. He rallied the scattered ships, pulling them into formation. "Stand with me," he cried. "We fight for every voice they tried to erase." His fleet became a shield, holding the hunters back for precious minutes, long enough for thousands of colonists to escape in transport ships, long enough for Earth to see that even in loss, humans could bleed the hunters, but the Solace did not survive. Cade drove his battleship straight into the heart of a hunter. The shadow flickered, twisted, and screamed without sound. The blast shook the entire system. For the first time, one of the hunters dissolved completely. The humans roared in triumph. But their joy turned to grief as the Solace and her captain were erased with it. The Battle of Vera ended in fire and blood. The colony was gone, erased from the maps. The fleet shattered, tens of thousands lost. Yet one hunter had fallen. It was not victory, but it was proof. Proof that the hunters could bleed. News of the sacrifice spread across the stars. Every human colony heard of Captain Cade and the Solace. Songs were written, oaths were sworn. The hunters were no longer untouchable gods. They were enemies, and enemies could be fought. But the price was terrible. For every life saved, 100 were lost. Entire histories, families, and futures erased, and still the hunters drifted on, searching for the next world. On Earth, the Council faced the bitter truth. Open war meant ruin, but retreat meant death. The scientists studied the hunter that had fallen, fragments of shadow scattered in the void. They discovered strange energy, something that bent memory and light, something that might one day become a weapon. But the cost of learning was high. The people mourned, but their grief burned into resolve. They had seen fire, they had seen blood, and they knew the war was only beginning. In the silence that followed the battle, one question grew louder than ever. If humanity could destroy one hunter, could they destroy them all? Or had the hunters allowed the Solace to win? Was it courage that broke the shadow, or was it part of a darker test? The answer was hidden in the void, and the void was watching. The war had reached a breaking point. Colonies had fallen, fleets had burned, families had vanished into silence. But one truth had been discovered at Vera. The hunters were not invincible. For weeks after the battle, the secret fleet scoured the ruins. They collected fragments of the dissolved hunter, small pieces of black matter that shifted in the light. When touched, the fragments whispered not in sound but in memory. Soldiers saw visions that were not their own, worlds they did not know, stars that had never been mapped. The fragments carried echoes of the hunters themselves. In hidden laboratories deep beneath Earth, scientists worked without rest. They studied the fragments, measuring their energy, their strange rhythm. The discovery was terrifying. The hunters did not only exist in space, they existed in memory itself. That was why they could erase worlds, why history itself bent around them. To fight the hunters, humanity needed more than weapons. They needed a way to protect memory, to anchor truth against erasure. The project was called Anchor, machines designed to hold human memory outside the mind. Each anchor could capture thoughts, names, histories, and lock them in a field the hunters could not touch. It was more than a weapon, it was survival of the story, because if humanity's story remained, then humanity could fight without memory. Resistance was meaningless, but the anchors were not only shields. The scientists found a way to turn the fragments of hunters against them. By forcing human memory into the fragment, the shadow cracked. It recoiled, unable to bear the weight of something it tried to erase. The test was small, a spark in the lab, but it was hope. The hunters could be wounded not by fire, but by memory. The council debated endlessly. Some argued the anchors were too dangerous. Others said there was no choice. Chancellor Varen ended the argument with steady words. "Hope is dangerous, but despair is death," she said. The order was given. The anchors would be used. The first chance came sooner than expected. A colony called Neril came under attack. 3 hunters slid across its skies. The defense fleets rushed to fight. But this time they carried anchors, massive engines of light and thought. Strapped into their ships, the Battle of Neril began. At first it was the same as always. Human weapons struck only smoke. Hunters drifted unharmed. Cities below began to fade. People screamed as towers dissolved. Then the anchors were activated. A wave of light rippled across the fleet. The hunters froze, their long bodies twisting. For the first time they hesitated. The anchors pushed human memory into the void. Every ship carried recordings of names, faces, voices. Every soldier spoke their family history into the machines. Every child's song, every old story, every lost home was thrown like a weapon into the shadows. The hunters shook, their forms flickering. One screamed without sound, it fractured in the middle. Splitting apart, the humans cheered. But the anchors demanded a cost. They drained energy, tore at the minds of the soldiers connected to them. Some fell unconscious, others forgot who they were. To fight erasure with memory meant giving a part of yourself away. And many never came back whole. Still, the hunters were driven back. 2 were forced to retreat, twisting into the void. The third dissolved completely, leaving nothing but ash. The colony of Neril was scarred, but it was not erased. For the first time, humanity had saved a world. The news spread faster than light. Songs of despair turned into songs of fire. People whispered not only of fear, but of hope. The hunters could bleed, the hunters could break. Humanity had found its turning point. In the hidden chambers of Earth, the council gathered again. Chancellor Varen spoke. "We have wounded them, but we do not yet know why they come," she said. Her words carried both pride and warning. For every victory, the hunters seemed to learn, and the next time, they would not make the same mistake. The anchors were sent across the fleets. Every ship, every outpost, every colony received them. Families lined up to record their memories, their names, their lives. Children recited songs into the machines. Old men told stories of wars long past. Every human voice became a weapon. Every memory became a shield. But deep in the silence of space, the hunters were watching. Their patterns shifted. Their movements changed. The survivors of Neril swore they saw the shadows hesitate before retreating. Not in defeat, but in thought, as if they were studying the humans, testing them. The hunters had come as predators. Now they stayed as something else, something waiting. The turning point had been reached. Humanity had drawn blood from the shadows. But questions remained sharper than victory. Why did the hunters test them instead of crushing them? What greater power stood behind their silence? And had the war truly begun? The anchors gave humans hope. But hope is only the beginning of war. The stars grew quiet after the Battle of Neril. For the first time in years, no colony fell. No world went silent. Human fleets spread across the galaxy with anchors in their holds. Everywhere they went, people cheered. The hunters had been stopped. Songs rose from the colonies. Children played under skies they once feared. Farmers planted crops in soil that had nearly been erased. The dream of the stars began to live again, and Earth's council declared that humanity had turned the tide. But in the silence of victory, questions lingered. Why had the hunters retreated? Why had they not returned in greater numbers? No one knew, and many chose not to ask. They wanted to believe the war was ending. They wanted peace. The anchors became symbols of pride, great monuments of memory. Colonies carved their histories into them. Ships carried them like banners of light. Every soldier wore a crest that said, "We remember, we endure," and people began to think the hunters were gone forever. Yet the fleet still reported strange sightings, shadows at the edge of scanners, signals that flickered for an instant then vanished. Some captains swore they felt eyes on them in the void. Others said they heard whispers in their sleep. The hunters had not been destroyed. They had only grown quiet. Then came the message. It was found drifting in deep space, recorded on a fragment of shadow. A human patrol ship picked it up. The crew thought it was static at first, but when they played it, the voice was clear. Not human, not alien, something in between. "We wanted to see if you were ready," the voice said. And then the recording ended. The words spread like fire. Ready for what? Was the war only a test? Had the hunters been measuring humanity instead of trying to destroy them? The council gathered again. Some said the voice was a trick, a lie meant to weaken resolve. Others feared it was truth, that the hunters were only the beginning of something far greater, something that waited beyond the stars. Chancellor Varen stood before the chamber, her face pale, her voice heavy. "If they are testing us, then we have passed only the first trial," she said. "But trials lead to greater trials, and we do not know how many lie ahead. On the colonies," people felt the weight of those words. Celebrations dimmed, songs grew quieter. Families looked to the skies not only with hope, but with unease. If this was only a test, what would come next? Still, humanity refused to bow. The anchors continued to grow. Every memory, every story, every life was stored in them. The hunters might return, but this time humanity would not face them blind. They had fire, they had blood, and they had memory that could not be erased. Soldiers swore new oaths. Captains trained in secret drills. Children grew up learning that their voices were as strong as weapons. Because in this new age, memory itself was armor, and no hunter could take that without a fight. Yet deep in the void, the shadows shifted. Not gone, not defeated, only waiting. The silence of the hunters was not peace, it was patience. And patience is the weapon of those who believe time belongs to them. The people of Earth looked to the stars with both pride and dread. They had survived fire, they had survived blood. They had turned despair into defiance, but they knew the war was not finished. It had only changed shape on a quiet night. A child on Earth looked up at the sky. She asked her father, "Will the hunters come back?" The father paused, then answered, "They will, but when they do, they will find us waiting." And so humanity stood on the edge of something greater. Not victory, not defeat, but a question. Had they truly won? Or had they only been allowed to survive? Were they conquerors of the stars, or players in a game they did not yet understand? The hunters had vanished, but their message remained. "We wanted to see if you were ready." And somewhere beyond the edge of every map, something far larger, far darker, was listening, watching the humans rise, waiting for the next move. The silence of the stars was not the end. It was only the beginning of the true war.